Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on grants. Is your organization ready for grants and what to do if the answer is no? We are joined by Lynn, Arsenault and Kelly McLaughlin, and they are two of the top thought leaders in nonprofit consulting, and I am thrilled to have their expertise with us today, just so that they can impart all of their knowledge onto you and help you navigate this, question about grants. They'll tell you, how to get started with grants and what to do if maybe you still need to do some work to get any type of additional revenue before grants. So super excited. We're here today, 1 o'clock Eastern over on the East Coast. I don't know where you all are at, but I hope you're taking a nice lunch break maybe, or maybe it's morning for you. And I'm so excited you're with us. A little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so you will have access to the recording and also the slides after the webinar. We'll send that out probably tomorrow or early next week. And so yeah, this is live. So we are speaking. If you can't hear us, then maybe change it like the setting on your device. But yeah, we're here. And if you have questions throughout today's webinar, you want to ask them your burning questions, you can chat. You can actually put those in our Q&A panel at the bottom. That'll be a nice, easy central location for questions. And we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. So a little bit about CauseVox. As I had mentioned, these are our speakers today. Lynn Arsenault, founder and CEO of LMA Grant Consulting, and Kelly McLaughlin, founder and CEO of Fit Strategic Consulting. I am super, super pumped that they are with us today. So always love them sharing all of their information about nonprofit work. But yeah, for those of you who are maybe new to CauseVox, I just want to let you know that CauseVox is a digital fundraising platform. We basically help growing nonprofits thrive, but with our best-in-class donation forms and mobile payments and campaigns and ticketing and peer-to-peer, we help you essentially put all of your fundraising in one place. We also do provide hands-on support and onboarding with real-life people like me. So, you won't be getting a robot or anything. People are here to care about your success. And we do provide top-rated fundraising education in the forms of guides, templates, webinars like this one, and courses to just help you, continue to grow in your fundraising. So essentially, we will replace any clunky or outdated software and just give you a more streamlined, easy to use donation form, crowdfunding, event ticketing form, peer-to-peer fundraising. Again, we focus on securing more donors through all of your transactions and all of your forms and pages, and just give you a great user experience for donors and yourself as well, getting all of your reports. In terms of donations, of course, donations are so important, right? So we want to give you today's donation forms with today's best marketing technology and as many mobile wallets as possible. So we've actually added 2 more mobile wallets. So now donors can pay with Apple Pay, Google Pay, Venmo, PayPal, and ACH bank transfer, which is especially helpful for your referring and pledge donors to just trust the security of their larger gifts. You can take one-time recurring and pledges, and all of your donations will have customizable auto receipts attached. So we'll be sending all those out to your donors automatically for you. In terms of ticketing, you can sell tickets in connection with your donations. So you can run ticketing, run donations at the same time for all of your event fundraising, and just house that all in one place. You don't have to have 7 different platforms, or that's an exaggeration, but you don't have to have more than one platform for your events. And you can do this along with peer-to-peer fundraising. It's a great combination, as we see that peer-to-peer fundraising is very, very successful. It helps organizations raise up to twice the amount of funds that they're anticipating. So we really encourage you to get your community and your network on board and fundraising on your behalf. And we give you a really easy, clutter-free, hands-off method for that. So if you are maybe new to CauseVox, or if your organization is getting up and running, maybe you need a really great best-in-class donation form or peer-to-peer, I'd love to talk with you, and I can talk specifically how CauseVox can help your organization. We can, tailor some things and talk about how we can secure more donors for your org this year. You can go to our schedule a demo page for that. And if you'd like more free resources just to learn more about fundraising, nonprofit work, you can subscribe to our blog, and we send out free resources every week. So you'll want to subscribe to that. Right now, I want to turn things over to Kelly and Lynn. Kelly McLaughlin actually creates fundraising strategies and systems that rapidly grow unrestricted revenue for arts and advocacy organizations. So she's helped tons and tons of clients grow their fundraising through her consulting work. And Lynn also works with nonprofit and social impact organizations nationwide to secure grant funding. So I am so excited to turn over the mic to these lovely ladies, and they're going to lead us through today's webinar. Welcome. And if you can, everyone, drop them some great emojis in the chat.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna. And I'm happy to kind of kick us off. So again, my name is Lynn, and Kelly and I have had the opportunity to actually hold this same conversation with a lot of great nonprofits. It's something that we're both very passionate about and that we work hand in hand with. We've even collaborated and supported nonprofits together, as our clients, because we've found that there is really this need where a lot of nonprofits might be kind of new to the sector. They feel like they're ready for grants, and then it turns out they're actually not well positioned quite yet. And so we like to give them some advice, and that's when I often will send them on over to Kelly to focus their time on individual giving for a while, and then kind of come back to me with grants when they're well positioned. So to share just a little bit of a background before we jump in of who I am and what I do in this space. Again, I'm the founder and CEO of LMA Grant Consulting, and we can drop the maybe if Jenna wants to drop the link into the chat to my website. My team, we work with nonprofits and social impact organizations nationwide and have raised over $14.5 million to date in grant funding. And we do that through strategically supporting nonprofits and really developing a very specific grant strategy and thinking about what is our pacing, who are the right fit funders, and then executing on those grants and applying for anywhere between 1 to 4 grants in the month, but also developing a long-term strategy as well. Something that I always like to share during webinars before kind of kicking it off is that myself, I'm also a former teacher. So before I came into the nonprofit sector years ago, I was a teacher. You'll probably notice in my presentation style, I like to pause and ask questions and ask you to share things in the chat. And you might even notice that I like to have kind of playful visionary things on our presentation as well. So I do like to share that. So as we're jumping in, the first thing that I'd like to share is that you'll see kind of this metaphor of an iceberg on the screen. And the reason for that is that I have found that so many times there is this idea where, folks will come into the nonprofit sector and say, I know that the one thing that I need to have in place before I actually apply for grants is this nonprofit status. So I have to make sure that I have my 501c3 status, but actually kind of like an iceberg, that's the first thing that comes to mind. But below the surface, there are a lot of other things that you need to have in place in order to be successful with grants. So while there might be this like legal status of having that 501c3 nonprofit, there are all these other things you want to have in place. And so today, that's what we're going to focus on, of what are the many things, and then what happens if it turns out that you're not well positioned for grants, then what? So diving in, That first thing, again, is that nonprofit status. So if you're on this call, then you are probably either in the process of getting a your 501c3 certification, or maybe you recently received it, or you've been certified for years. Something to think about is that if you are an organization that has no intention of ever becoming 501c3 certified, then perhaps fiscal sponsorship is another option you might consider, where you work with another organization under their 501c3 status. And that also kind of gives you a backdoor entryway into the benefits of the nonprofit sector. We're not going to dive too much into that today, but you can, of course, feel free to reach out to me if you would like to chat more about that. Before we go into all of these areas of like, what should you have in place, I would love to ask folks to just share in the chat, what sector are you in? So education, healthcare, arts and culture. Are you in, do you work with immigrants and refugees? Are you working with youth, social justice, national housing? This is great. Wonderful. So we have a really wide range. So what's really great is that no matter what sector you're in today, the information that we're going to share will apply to you regardless. So no matter what sector you're in, these are the things that you'll want to have in place beforehand. So of course, in order to apply for foundation and corporate grants, we're going to need that nonprofit status. But then the next thing that you're going to want to have in place is this mission and vision. You want to make sure that when you are sharing your work with the world, that it's very clear. If I were to go on your website right now and read your mission, how broad is it, or how specific is it? If I were to read it, would I understand immediately who you are and what you do? And if not, then that might be a good moment to step back and say, should we kind of rephrase this? Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with the grant world? Your mission and vision ties directly into your elevator pitch. It is so important that when you have a conversation with any kind of funder, and especially a grant funder, that you should be able to, within 30 seconds, kind of explain who you are, what you do, what is the purpose of your organization. So much of that comes out with your mission and vision. And I will say Kelly is a real expert in this area and works a lot with nonprofits to kind of refine their mission and vision. This is something that you certainly need to have in place before you're applying. This next piece is functioning programs. This probably seems so obvious to folks, but you would be surprised. A lot of times I've had organizations come to me and say, I've just gotten my 501c3 status. I think this is what we want to do, but we need grant funding in order to actually start a program. And that's where I actually pause folks and say, actually, as frustrating as it is, you do need to have your programs already operating and be able to show that you're having an impact already on your on your community before you apply for grants. And so what that might look like is maybe if you're in the very beginning stages, you run a pilot program because maybe you have this idea and it will probably change and shift over time as you learn what are kind of the responses from those individuals that you reach. Are you meeting the needs in the best way possible? Are there new needs that come to light? And as you're doing this, collect testimonials and make sure that you're gathering information. You're taking a lot of notes. Maybe if you're able to, you're taking pictures of the pilot program in process. This is really important because funders want to see that you already have your program running. I know some of us might be scratching our heads now and saying, well, how am I supposed to fund that? Again, we'll kind of get to that the second half here. But if you're saying, I need to run a pilot program, I need money, grants actually aren't your best source of funding at that moment. Instead, grants are a great place to pursue once your programs are functioning and you can prove that you have an impact within your community. Along that same line, some folks will ask, well, how many years should my programs be running for? Now, there's no perfect answer for this, but something that I do see quite often is that funders will ask for information that dates back at least 3 years. So this might be financial information. This might be your metrics, your measurement, impact data. So what I recommend to organizations is that once your organization has been operating for at least 3 years, this is kind of that sweet spot where it's a good moment to dive into grants. It's not to say that if you're at 2.5 years, it doesn't mean that you're not eligible. You're pretty close at that point. But 3 years is kind of that safe spot that, okay, you've been running it for a while. You've probably seen some areas that maybe you weren't expecting at the beginning that you can kind of shift your programs to. So this is a good place to really start. I'm curious with this in mind, and just asking folks to drop a number into the chat. How many years has your nonprofit been operating? 50 years. Wow, that's fantastic. 3, 4, nearly 10. So we have a pretty good mix of a few not started up yet. It was a good mix of early organizations and then really well-established organizations, which is fantastic. I'm thrilled to hear that. So if you have been around for more than 3 years, then check that box. You are doing good. Let's see if you can kind of check these other items as well. Following up on having those programs operating for at least 3 years, you want to make sure you have evidence of impact. On every grant application, almost every grant application, I should say, you are going to be asked, what does success look like? And how do you know if you are successful? You need to have very specific tools to measure your success. And sometimes when Kelly and I have had these conversations, a question that frequently comes after this is, well, what are the tools that we use to measure success? That really depends on your organization and the programs that you're running. So for example, if you're running an education-based nonprofit and it's specifically focused on raising literacy rates and being able to read, you want to make sure that you're providing perhaps a pre-assessment and a post-assessment that measures growth in that skill area. Now that's going to be very different from a nonprofit who maybe is a food pantry and you want to measure the number of families that you're reaching in a certain year. So you want to make sure that it's catered to your specific nonprofit and that you're measuring the information that is relevant to the work that you do. Something to keep in mind with this, when you are sharing what success means to you in a grant, you want to make sure that they are SMART goals. You want to make sure that you are and I am thinking about that acronym of SMART goals. And
specific,
yes.
Here, this is my specialty. Specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound.
Exactly. And the reason is because at the end of the grant cycle, if you do get funding, you're going to need to report on the specific goals that you set out. So make sure that they are SMART goals, that you can measure them, and that it makes sense to include it in this grant application. Maybe you have internal goals that maybe don't make sense to share externally quite yet, but you want to make sure whatever you're putting out into the world in your grant application that you can actually measure it. The next thing that you want to make sure that you have is a budget. There are so many different formats that you can put a budget in. But it's really important that the budget that you include in a grant application is easy to digest for someone on the outside. Now, there are so many different ways to pull numbers together, and I'm sure that if your organization has been around for a long time, you probably have a very complicated internal facing budget. For a grant application, you want to actually simplify it and make sure that someone could look at it and kind of understand your financial story and see if you are sustainable financially. Do you have a deficit? If you do have a deficit, make sure that you're explaining that within your footnotes and providing explanations really on anything that might not make sense. There are so many templates. I have one particular template that I really like that is free. You can go on this website. It's called Philanthropy Massachusetts. And this is sort of my go-to budget template where they have this kind of pre-input income sources, and then you fill in your own expenses. And it's nice because you can align your total organization budget here with a specific project budget. I know this isn't super clear, but for grants, this is great because then what you can do is show, okay, if I'm asking for a $25,000 grant, how am I allocating those funds? We could go into a whole conversation diving specifically into this. I won't go into too much more detail here, but I definitely recommend exploring different budget formats. The reason I show this to you is just to say this is probably a little bit more simplified compared to what you have as an internal facing budget. And that's definitely on purpose. You want to make sure that you are making it very clear and it's easy to read. This is something that you will be asked for most grant applications. If you are very new and you're just like, I don't know where to start, definitely consult your board. Make sure that you're having conversations with your board about what are the approved expenses for the year, what is the projected income, and projections are an estimate. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to be, an educated guess. You want it to be close to what you hope to actually achieve. If you're still completely lost there and you're like, I just have no idea, consider maybe chatting with a CPA or someone who's familiar with nonprofit budget projections to put together your first budget. I also like to recommend recruiting someone with an accounting experience on your board. It's always very, very helpful to have that kind of insight close by. Speaking of the budget, additional financial documentation that you want to have, on hand and ready to supply for grants. Most funders will ask for your most recent 990 form. So as a nonprofit, this might depend on, how much revenue you make, what 990 form that you're submitting. If it's under 50,000, I believe it's a 990 postcard, which is a little bit simpler. And then at different thresholds, it changes what form you have to submit to the IRS. With that being said, the funder asks for something like an audited financial statement and your organization makes under $500,000 in the year, your organization wasn't required to get an audit. So what can you do instead? You can provide a reviewed financial statement instead of an audited financial statement. So if that's come up as a question, if you keep seeing it say, we have to provide an audited financial statement, but we don't have that. The good news is you can provide one that's reviewed by a CPA and not necessarily audited. That will save you a lot of money. And then after that $500,000 threshold, that's where you are required to have it. Funders often also ask for a profit and loss statement. If you use a bookkeeping platform such as QuickBooks or something similar, this is something that you should be able to kind of easily pull, but just have that in mind that is something that you want to have ready and on hand. And of course, going back to having that budget, both for your full organization as well as any specific program that you might be asking for support on. I know that's a lot of information. I understand that the finances can be kind of the scariest part, but I will say that once you have a budget formed and you have these documents ready, it becomes a lot easier and you can really streamline your process. But as we're thinking about finances and documenting where the money has come from, you might also be thinking about, well, if I need a grant to get up and running, but funders don't want to fund me until I'm operating for 3 years, where am I getting that money? This is where we're going to think about other sources of revenue. And in a few moments, I'll actually turn it over to Kelly to talk more about this. But here's one of the frustrating things for new nonprofits. When it comes to grants, grant giving entities want to see that you already have sustainable funding coming in from places other than just grants. Funders don't want to be the first to fund you. They don't want to be the only one to fund you. And they certainly want to make sure that you have a diverse revenue stream. This is one of the most frustrating things for new nonprofits because that's when we say, where in the world am I supposed to get this money from? Don't worry, because there are other ways. What I will say is that when you see the question on a grant application that says, what is your sustainability plan? While they might not say it directly, this is really a financial question. They want to know that you have a diverse revenue stream. The reason for this is because funders want to make sure that they're not going to cripple your organization. They want to make sure that by funding you, it won't actually hurt you in the long term. Because if they can only give you funds for one calendar year and it's not renewed, will that actually hurt your organization long term? Will you not be able to continue your programs? So this is, really they want to make sure that they're helping you and not hurting you. And that is the purpose around this. One of the last items to think about is your own capacity for grant writing. It's important to keep in mind that grants take time. When it comes to grant management, it's really helpful to have an assigned person on your team or an external person like a grant consultant to support your team. A lot of times, nonprofits are already overworked. People are wearing many hats. They are trying to manage all of the tools at the same time and trying to get all the things done. I've talked to a lot of nonprofits who've been around for 50 and 60 years, and they struggle to get grants out the door because there isn't one specific person working on it. It's more of just added on to somebody's job who's already doing a lot of things. So think about, if you're going into the grant world for the first time, who do you plan to have managing your grants? One thing that I like to caution people away from is asking a board member to do it, because the board roles are typically volunteer, and that's it takes so many hours to do grants that it can burn people out really quickly if they're not actually being compensated for it. You can work with a grant consultant or a grant consulting team like myself. I am always happy to chat with folks and see how I can support, because it is important to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward. If you're going to invest in the time it takes for grants, make sure that you're doing it in the way that's going to lead to success. With that in mind, when visiting my website, if you go to the contact page, you'll find a link that says set up a consultation. And there is a 3-question survey before you sign up for a consultation, because I want to kind of see, are you ready for grants? If it turns out that you're not yet well positioned, then it will lead you to a page to sign up for a 90-minute strategic advisory session, which we can work together and set up a really detailed plan for you to help get you positioned for grants. If it turns out that you are well positioned for grants, you can sign up for a free consultation and we can see if it might make sense to work together. All of this, all of these items within the iceberg metaphor really come down to this big question of what stage is your nonprofit at? There are several different stages that your nonprofit could be at. You could be at this idea stage where maybe you're just thinking about what could your nonprofit be. Maybe you're at this startup stage where you're pulling together the paperwork. Maybe you've just become 501c3 certified. You're getting your board members together, maybe your first staff. So you're really at that startup phase. Then there's this growth phase. Maybe you have been running some pilot programs, you're figuring out what works, you're collecting data and measuring that impact in your organization, and you're kind of picturing, okay, what can we be for the future? How can we best reach our constituents? And then there's this really nice stage of sustainability. This is where you have been bringing in diverse revenue. You have programs that are working. You have a clear impact in your community. This is where grant giving entities are ready to fund you. You want to be in this sustainable stage. So let's take a moment to assess. I know there's a lot of words on the screen. Basically, it's exactly what I've just explained of what are the different stages. I would love for everybody to just take a moment and reflect and drop a, 1 or 2 words into the chat. Do you feel like your nonprofit is at the idea stage, startup, growth, or sustainable? Growth. See number 3, which is sustainability. That's great. Startup. And sometimes, organizations might linger a little bit in that growth stage, and that's okay. I've seen nonprofits that have been in that growth stage for 5 or 10 years because it just is taking a longer time to kind of get off the ground and get sustainable revenue, and that's perfectly okay. So a lot of growth stage. So with that being said, as especially if you're an organization that's at the growth stage, then you might be thinking, well, what else should I be doing if grants aren't right for me? At the same time, even if you are at that sustainability stage, you might be thinking, how else can I diversify my revenue? So this is where I would like to turn it over to Kelly, who's going to take us into what are the other options outside of grant funding.
Unmute. The unmute button is magic. All right. Thanks, Lynn. So I will take over the screen share. What can you do when you realize you are not quite ready for grants? What can you do? The main thing I direct people to is individual giving, because that is something that many organizations do have access to and can access pretty quickly. I do also do consulting with nonprofits, as Lynn mentioned, on the mission, vision, just getting that portion, your strategic plan, identifying your SMART goals, figuring out how you're going to measure your impact, all of that kind of stuff. I do work with nonprofits on that as well. And when I do that stage, sometimes we identify other sources of revenue beyond individual giving, beyond grants. Sometimes it is consulting lines. Sometimes it is earned revenue, sales, tickets, membership programs. There are lots of different things nonprofits can do, but what you can do for that kind of other types of unrestricted revenue, the sky's the limit and very dependent on which nonprofit you're with. So what I will talk about today is getting started with individual giving, because that is something that works for every nonprofit. But just know that you're not just limited to individual giving either. And I can help you with that. So again, by way of brief introduction, I'm Kelly McLaughlin. I'm the founder and CEO of FIT Strategic Consulting. Here at FIT, we craft strategic fundraising plans to help arts, advocacy, and disability organizations rapidly scale their unrestricted revenue, while making sure your organization has greater impact, happier donors, and less stressed staff. So when nonprofits have unrestricted revenue, it really does put you in the driver's seat, and you don't have to run your nonprofit based on what appeals to donors. And so you can put your people first, right? And so grants are then a great way to supplement projects and take on really big projects, but you are in the driver's seat because you also have this unrestricted, sustainable giving. And that's what we want to do for every nonprofit, is get them to that space where grants are an add-on to grow massively and support their projects, but not what you're dependent on to just survive, right? So my first question, are you ready for individual giving? Because here we go again, right? There are some things that you need. Lynn went over what you need for grants. The bar is a lot lower for individual giving, right? You do need a donor database. You don't need any donors in that database, but I always say make sure you have the database first. Is there anybody who does not have a database? Put that in the chat, right? Let me know. But you do need a database that will keep everything together for you. And also I recommend strong fundraising tools like CauseVox. I often am the one recommending CauseVox to my clients because they do have a back end that can sub in for your donor database for a bit. But also the thing I don't want to see is just a PayPal plugin, right? I want to see the tools that CauseVox puts at your fingertips on your website, because it's just a great place to start. I will say this is not just me saying this because we're working with CauseVox. Lynn can attest that I always tell people, if you don't have a database, CauseVox should be your first stop on every single one of these presentations that we do together. The second thing you want is an engaged board. If your board isn't engaged, you're really in an unfortunate place of starting with your own personal community to fundraise for. And while I've seen executive directors and founders do well soliciting their personal contact, it's just a lot harder to solicit your own people, just for interpersonal reasons, right? So that's where having an engaged board and having a community to fundraise with is really important. And then last, you need community support. That means volunteers and other community supporters that you can ask for donations or introductions. You need to be able to show that people are bought into your concept, right? I also say mission, vision, goals are really key. Once you're starting to really build an individual giving program, you can kind of hack it for a little bit and raise some funds without clear mission and vision, just because you can do those interpersonal conversations and get people bought in. But it's only going to take you so far. Having that clarity of mission, vision, and a 3 to 5 year strategic plan with clear goals is really, really key as a starting point as well. So once you have those tools set up, if you want a long-term sustainable individual giving program, you need to focus on donor engagement. And I visualize that as this sustaining donor pipeline, right? So unfortunately, what I see most organizations focused on is the middle, which is solicit, right? We ask and we ask and we ask, and we have fundraising events and fundraising events and fundraising events, right? And we pretty much only talk to our donors when we need money. And I'm telling you right now, donors do not like being treated like ATMs, right? It is not enter numbers, get money, right? That's not how donors work. So building a relationship with a prospect or a donor is, I like to say, it's like finding a life partner. You're trying to get people who are going to be invested in your mission for the long term. And I liken the solicitation to a proposal. If you go to a speed dating session and propose to every single person you encounter in that speed dating session, everyone's going to run fleeing from you, right? Nobody wants that. You're the crazy one in the room, right? So what we want to do is build those relationships. So bear with me, it's a silly analogy, but I think it works because we're talking about building relationships with our donors, right? So our first stage is identification. It's going out into the world and seeing who is out there. This is your speed dating session, right? You're going to meet a bunch of people and see if they jive with you. What I like to do is kind of have my ideal donor in mind. What are their values? How old are they? Where am I going to find them? Where are they hanging out? If I'm going to sign up for a speed dating session, do I want to go to, one that's marketed towards environmentalists because I want to be in a relationship with somebody who's an environmentalist, right? So I'm only going to go to those types of speed dating sessions, right? So those types of things, where are the people hanging out that you align with as far as mission and vision, and especially your values, right? The change you want to see in the world. Cultivate is the dating part. You found someone who is interesting to you, they're interested in you, and you're figuring out if you're a good fit. This is your cultivate stage with your donor. This is where we're storytelling, we're bringing them in on the mission, we're sharing our strategic plan with them, we're getting to know and build affinity with this donor. And then solicit is the proposal. Once we know that we are a good fit, we're going to ask for a deeper commitment from this person. So maybe they're going from a volunteer to a donor, right? We're asking for a deeper commitment from this person. So that's why the proposal belongs in the middle of a relationship, and the solicitation belongs in the middle of a relationship with a donor and not at the front end, right? Which is why fundraising events are going to wear you out, is because that's like proposing to everybody and then you have a fun night and then they go their separate ways and they had fun, but they're not interested anymore, right? That's why fundraising events are so fundamentally exhausting to us as fundraisers, right? And that brings me to the other part is once they have said yes to your proposal and they want that deeper commitment, just as you would in a marriage, you don't walk away and stop talking to them, right? That's not a good marriage, right? Marriage isn't the end of the relationship. It's the beginning of a committed relationship, a more engaged relationship. And so when you get a donation from a donor, it is the beginning of a more engaged relationship, and we need to treat it thus as nonprofits, right? These are the people who are really bought in. And if we start to ignore them because we already got the gift, they're going to leave us, right? And not come back. So that's where stewardship becomes really, really critical. And that is the piece I see most nonprofits missing out on is, I got the gift, I'll come back when I need another gift, right? And really the critical stage is that stewardship piece. How do you keep them engaged? And then upgrade is where you upgrade the relationship, right? Here's where my dating analogy gets really funny, right? Maybe you're going to get a dog, maybe you're going to have kids, right? I don't know. You do you, right? But that's where with different donor relationships, sometimes the donors are going to stay where they are and they're going to stay at that level forever. Some of your donors are going to go into recurring giving, and that's going to be where they can make an impact. Some are going to become major donors, legacy donors, all of that, right? But that's after you have deepened and built that committed relationship with them, right? So that's my very silly dating analogy for your donors, right? So what I like to say is when you're starting your individual giving program, you want to think through all of this, right? And what I tend to see organizations do is they think tactic, not strategy. So I'm going to have a gala. We're going to do a food drive. We're going to do a this, right? We're going to do a that. We're going to try Facebook ads. We're going to try. That's not a strategy. That's a tactic, right? What you want to do is figure out how are you going to cultivate a donor across their lifetime. So maybe a Facebook ad is where you're going to identify somebody, but don't ask them for a gift in the Facebook ad. Ask them for their email address in the Facebook ad, right? Tell them some stories via email and then ask them for a gift, right? That's that dating analogy, right? Because I don't know about you, I've never given to a Facebook ad. And the return on that is very low. So just keep that in mind, is that it's a long-term thing. If you are going to make a solicitation, a gala, right? Sure, you're going to sell tickets, but to who, right? You need to think about those two, the identify and cultivate, because that selling of that ticket to that gala is the solicit stage, not the identify stage. Okay. So just keep that in mind the next time a board member tells you to hold a fundraising event. Steal my dating analogy and push back, right? So anyway, that is how I think about fundraising. That is the framework that we use here at FIT to create fundraising programs for our donors, or for our clients, for their donors. All right. So how do you start building your pipeline, right? If you have no donors at all, start with your board and engage volunteers to identify donors within their networks. Who are people within their networks that would buy into what you're doing? If you have a few donors, excellent. Begin with excellent stewardship, right? Don't do the not talking to them after the marriage thing. Make sure that you keep those donors. The reason being, I liken it to a bucket that's got a hole in the bottom, right? If you are filling up that bucket, but there's a hole in the bottom and they're all falling out, we're losing all of our donors. So it does not matter how much water we put in the top, we are not going to grow at all because the water is falling out of the bottom, right? So we've got to plug that hole, and that hole is your donor retention that you improve with donor stewardship, right? We plug that hole, and now all the water that comes in is going to spill over into other buckets, right? And that is how we grow as nonprofits, right? So there's always a dual goal to every fundraising program, and that is to identify new donors and keep the donors you have. And those goals are equally important, right? And I see so many organizations obsessed with goal one, identify new. I want the new donors. That's how I'm going to grow. And they ignore the keeping the donors they have, where they would have grown faster if they just kept the donors they had, right? That's a lot of clients that come to me who have been fundraising for 10 years and they're frustrated and they're burned out and they've gone through 5 development directors, right? That's usually the problem, is we've put no effort into keeping the donors we have, right? That's the fastest way to burn out a fundraiser. All right, so donor ABCs, this is something to keep in mind. I tend to talk to people who think everyone and anyone could be a donor to their organization, but that's just not true. I will never give to sports organizations. I'm sorry, I know they're important. I'm an arts baby. I was grown up in an arts family. I'm an arts kid, right? And I'm just not interested in sports causes. So I'm not your demographic if you're a sports organization, right? So you have to keep in mind these donor ABCs, right? The first thing is access. Can you contact this person? If you don't, they're not a good donor, right? I was gonna say, if anybody else tells me to call Oprah, I don't have her cell phone number. I'm sure she's lovely. I don't have her phone number. So she is not a donor to any cause that I am a part of, right? So first thing is access. You have to be able to talk to them. Do you have to have their phone number yet? No, but you have to be able to find them on social media or through a community event or something, right? You have to have access. B in the donor ABCs is belief. Do they care about your cause or mission, right? That's my analogy I give to lots of arts organizations, not a lot to youth sports organizations, right? That's not my thing. My brother-in-law loves sports causes. He's your good donor, right? Go get him if you're a sports organization. He could care less about the arts, right? And that's how we take all kinds to make a world, right? So make sure that your donors are aligned in believing what you believe, right? Your cause and your mission. And then the last thing I tend to think about is capacity. Do they have the disposable income to donate at the level you need them to donate, right? So if you need a major gifts program, somebody who only has the capacity to give you $50 is not a good donor prospect for your major gifts program. If you're looking for hundreds of donors giving you $50 each, then somebody with the capacity to give you $50 is the right donor for your organization, right? So that's the donor ABCs, right? That's what we're thinking about as we're going out into the world looking for people. So getting started, start with people who are already in your community or on your email list, even better. Staff and board, making them do outreach to their networks to see like who are these people who we already have access to, right? Volunteers, I know a lot of organizations that are terrified to solicit their volunteers. Volunteers are actually great donors to your organization. Just because they give you time doesn't mean they can't give you money. And vice versa. Just because people are donors doesn't mean they won't volunteer, right? People can do more than one thing. If you run a nonprofit that has pet adopters, patrons, show attendees, people who are coming to use your services, but they, have the capacity to also fund your services. I like to use pet adoption agencies. Usually people adopting pets are people who have disposable income, right? And so they're great donors for pet adoption agencies, right? That's a really good example of how your patrons can also, or your clients can also be the beneficiary. Sorry, your beneficiaries can also be your donors. Blech. And then, all of these folks have A, likely B, and so you're just vetting the C, right? So that's the thing. Again, don't be tempted to have your first interaction and have it be a solicitation. That is the main takeaway from here, right? So how do you do this instead, right? You're starting to build a relationship. Usually what I try to start out with is getting that email address, because then I can tell stories via email, right? I can cultivate that audience and keep them engaged. If I'm relying on them seeing all my Facebook posts, forget about it, right? Facebook's algorithms are not in your favor, right? But catching them with a single Facebook post asking for their email address can be a really good way to do that. How can you do that? Again, that depends on your mission. This is where we bifurcate a little. You can have them sign a petition, right? I work with a lot of advocacy organizations, so signing petitions is a very strong thing that we use. It's also, I love it because it's mission aligned, right? So you're getting people who are clearly raising their hands to say, I believe in what you believe. I believe in this organization. I believe in the thing you're doing. Right. And so a petition is a really great way to catch people. And then again, make sure that's everywhere, right? It's on your Facebook, it's on your homepage. If that's something you're doing, make sure that's everywhere. Asking people to visit your website is also a really great way to use social media to get people more bought in, right? Get them off social media and onto your things, right? Your platforms. Also, I've worked with clients, we've just done simple email capture things, right? Just asking, hey, we're about to send out this really cool announcement. Make sure you're on our email list so you're the first to hear about it, right? That's another thing you can do. Business partnerships is something I have worked on with nonprofits, right? This is an example, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We partnered with a community solar program that as they were signing people up, people could say that they wanted, I can't remember, it was like $5 of their first payment to go to our nonprofit, right? And then the company gave us the list of people who decided to donate, right? And so we were promoting their product, they were promoting us. It was a really, really great way to build our list. And then pledges. Pledges is another example. I really like this example, Wait Until 8th. It's a campaign to get parents to not give their kids smartphones until 8th grade. And so they have this pledge, right? And that's what they're driving people to on social media is take the pledge and we'll help you figure out how to, raise your kids without a smartphone, right? And so that pledge gets them email addresses and then they can cultivate from there, right? So all kinds of creative ways that drive to email capture, right? That are mission aligned. And that's what I really love. All right, so once you've identified your donors and gotten them engaged, you cultivate them, storytelling, emails, other things, open houses. I love open houses. If you've got a facility, right? That's one of my favorite things. I love open houses. You also want to make sure the other piece of all of this, right? And my dating analogy, you're not out there talking about yourself, right? Who wants to go on a date with that guy, right? The person who's just constantly talking about themselves. So part of all of this cultivation, and especially in stewardship, is talking, but also remembering that your donors aren't going to get engaged unless they can talk back. Right. And so that's the real relationship building part, is making sure there are ways for them to talk back to you in all of this. Right. Because otherwise we're just broadcasters. Right. That's not what anybody wants to be a part of. Right. So that is kind of the quick and dirty of how you start to build an individual giving program. If you feel like you need help creating your individual giving program, or let's say grants and individual giving doesn't seem like the thing for you, reach out to me. Like I said, I do strategy planning with nonprofits to clarify mission and vision, and also identifying what are your potential other unrestricted revenue sources, right? So when I start working with clients, that is thing one that we do is we do mission, vision, strategy planning, and are there other unrestricted revenue options for you? And then we build the individual giving plan as well. So that is what I do with my clients. I have programs that start as low as $2,500 to help you start growing that program, right? So, and my programs allow you to craft or revise your fundraising program. I do this with clients in a day-long workshop, right? So we are in and out and on your way. So that is what I really specialize in, is that deeply transformative single day, you're up and running after a day. So if you're interested in that, please schedule with me, and I'd love to talk to any of you. So anyway, and final slide, if you're interested in getting in touch with me, here is my contact information. I'll also drop it in the chat, and you can get in touch with Jenna as well. So that is what I've got for you all.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Lynn. We do have a few minutes. I just loved all of the very specific opportunities that nonprofits can take from this and just start implementing right away. I think so. So in the meantime, everyone, if you're here, you want to stick around for the next 7 or so minutes. We do have time for a Q&A. A couple of people chatted in some questions, so I will pose them now. But if you have any more, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. So our first one is from Maria. This was targeted towards grants, I think. She said, at the grow stage, when you mentioned staff, does it really count when it's a volunteer-run organization, or is this referring to paid staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So say if your organization is completely volunteer run, but you've been around for 10, 15 years, you kind of check all those other boxes, I would definitely say you can begin searching for grants. But as you're doing so, really read the fine lines of the qualifications for specific funders, because some funders will say that they do or don't fund fully volunteer organizations. It will really depend on the funder. Some funders may look at an all volunteer staff and say, or sorry, an all volunteer organization and say, well, if you don't have any paid staff, does that mean you're really financially sustainable? And then questions might come out of that. But that doesn't mean that there won't be grants that could exist that would align with what you're doing. So it just means kind of cautiously go into the grant world and have that in mind as you're looking for well-aligned funders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that insight, Lynn. Yeah, any other questions maybe about growing your individual giving wherever you're at? Yeah, thanks for dropping in your LinkedIn. Yeah, I guess like what would you say is like, I guess for both Kelly and Lynn, like, so if it's somebody getting ready to do grants, what would be your number one tip for just starting out?
Yeah, so I would say if we have like gone through all of these check boxes and said, okay, we are ready for grants, we're ready to jump in, it's really important to think about what will your ask be? Like, what is your greatest need in your organization where grants could be supportive? Because funders want to come in at a point where they are not necessarily helping your organization build and become an organization, but instead they want to deepen the impact that you're already having. So if you step back and look at what are your organization's greatest needs, that would be the most important first step. Is it staff expansion? Is it growing a certain program? Do you need to are you looking at having a capital campaign where you're maybe building an infrastructure? There's different types of grants for all of those different needs. So really just having a clear understanding of what is the greatest need of your organization and then finding grants that align with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, Lynn, I think you and I would agree on this, is I think nonprofits really underestimate how important strategic plans are for individual donors, for grant funders. I think we think, oh, we've got an idea and that's enough. People buy into it because they value what I value. But really, I think strategic planning gets a really bad rap in the nonprofit world. I'm trying to change that. That is one of my missions, is to really change that, because it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out, painful process that feels divorced from your programming. It's something I do with nonprofits in a day, a couple weeks. It's not a huge lift, but it is absolutely critical in getting funding and growing sustainably, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Vanessa had one more question if you wanted to tackle this, Kelly. Best way to retain donors when there's only one development person without much time to dedicate to relationship building?
Yeah. So this is why I use that pipeline framework, because I like to batch my donors. I used to run a program. I was raising $1 million a year from individual donors. I had 500 different donors who I think all thought they were my only donor, right? Because you can batch that. And so there are tons of tools. Vanessa, I would say, why don't you set up a consultation with me? We can talk about what you need. But really that pipeline and thinking about who are my different donors, what kind of buckets can I put them into, that makes it really, really easy for me to have things that feel like one-off conversations, but are actually mass communications, right? I mean, I love mail merge. I love me a mail merge, right? And sending things that feel like individual emails to a big group of donors, right? I was thinking about you when this happened, right? But I sent it to 50 people, right? There's definitely tools like that. It's about really thinking about that pipeline and who is where in the pipeline, and who, how can I segment my donors so that I can communicate to them en masse, but in a way that feels very individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this has been very insightful, and lots of great questions too that have come up. If you have any more that maybe you think about later, like, oh, I wish I asked, XYZ. Yeah, please feel free to reach out to Lynn and Kelly. I'm sure they'd love to chat with you and discuss solutions for your organization. And I guess in the time being, I just want to drop off some quick links for CauseVox, just in the event that you want some tools to raise funds right away. Once you put your plans in place, you're looking to receive your funds, feel free to schedule a demo with us. If you're looking for that strategic planning, feel free to book a call with Kelly or Lynn for your grants. And then if you wanted to subscribe to our blog, this is the one for CauseVox. And then if you had any additional questions about CauseVox specifically, excuse my you can email us at support@causevox.com. But yeah, I really, really loved spending this time with you all today. And I really just hope that you have a great rest of your day, and feel free to ask us any questions via email. So great. And we will talk to you soon then. Happy fundraising.
Bye. Thanks for having us, Jenna.
Thank you.